Israel has issued a challenge to Russia following Russia's earlier downing of the Mimim air base in Latakia, Syria. Israel launched an airstrike on Tartus, where the Russian air bases are located this time. The Damascus regime said that a huge number of missiles were fired from the Mediterranean Sea to Tartus. The exact quantity is unknown, but it was a large number. Following that, the attack was carried out in the early hours of the morning. According to Syria's official news agency, SANA, following the strike, Syria said that the missiles fired injured 2 persons. The Israeli FAST, as usual, has chosen to remain silent on this attack. Tartus, which was struck by Israeli jets on November 1st, is described as the first strike suffered by Yair Lapid's interim prime minister, who decided to conduct early elections. And it was stunning that this incident occurred after Yair Lapid's interim prime minister. So how did Russia manage to set up these air bases in Syria with Russia's continued invasion of Ukraine? Russian President Vladimir Putin has declared his support for Syrian President Bashar al-Assad and has taken refuge at the Tartus naval base on the Mediterranean coast. What was mentioned in the deal between Moscow and Damascus that came to light recently was that Russian forces would utilize this Tartus base for free for the next 49 years, and that Russian soldiers at this site could not be tried in any way in Syrian decriminalization. Putin delivered the agreement on the extension of the Russian Navy's naval facility in Tartus to the Duma, which is linked with the Russian parliament. And how is Russia planning to develop this naval facility in the future? According to the agreement, the Russian naval facility will be excluded from civil and administrative authorization in Syria. All goods owned by Russia on this base are known to be free from several deceptions, such as search and seizure. It is known that this decision can be extended for another 25 years if no party objects. And it contains the statement that Russia has the right to send the appropriate number of troops to protect this site following Israel's activities against Russia. He issued a statement regarding military support to Ukraine. The following is an explanation. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu stated that his country is rethinking its military cooperation to Ukraine and that it has taken action against Iran's production of weapons and essential vehicles. In an earlier interview with CNN, Benjamin Netanyahu stated, "I'm making an assessment of it." When asked about the potential of sending the Israeli-made Iron Dome air defense system to Ukraine for assistance, he stated, "I'm making an assessment of it. I won't go in detail here, but as Israel, it is understood that Iran will take action against the production of weapons used in Ukraine," Netanyahu said after pointing out that the U.S. had transported part of the many ammunition stores it has on Israel to Ukraine. Following that, Netanyahu did not confirm or deny reports that Israel was behind the weekend drone attack on an Iranian ordnance production site in the city of Isfahan. As a result of any eruption in the Middle East, Israel gets blamed and pointed at. He continued. He said things like, "Sometimes we do it, sometimes we don't." The continued assistance to Ukraine has no end. Following the 14 Leopard 2 tanks deployed by Germany to Ukraine for the current conflict, U.S. President Biden recently declared that he would send 31 MAN Abrams tanks from the U.S. Army in the next months. Joe Biden, announcing the decision from the White House, stated that the MAN Abrams tanks he will send will be extremely useful in developing fighting techniques with agility on open terrain. The Ukrainian army will be trained in the use of these tanks. The training process for these jet-powered tanks is expected to be lengthy, and because the tanks will be sent in a few months, according to Biden's announcement, it may take months for the MAN Abrams tanks to be visible in the open field. In addition to the shipping and training processes, the MAN Abrams is the main battle tank of the American Army's armored units. This is the 37th name. General Creighton Abrams, commander of the Armored Brigade and chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, inspired the name with thermal cameras and substantial armor. This tank is difficult to neutralize, but it is also easy to neutralize its opponent. This beast can travel at 40 m, has a 1,100 horsepower diesel engine, weighs close to 70 tons, and can blast 120 tank cannons within effective range and assault with all its might. Following this U.S. military support, concerns have been expressed over the shipment of F-16s to Ukraine. Biden said no to both of these queries. Biden's remarks come a day after Germany refused to deliver combat fighters to Ukraine. Ukraine claims that warplanes have played a significant role in the continuing conflict with Russia over control of its airspace. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andriy Melnik expressed tolerance and satisfaction with this statement. He did, however, tell the nations bordering Ukraine to organize a coalition of fighter jets and dispatch Eurofighters Tornadoes, French Rafales, and Swedish Gripen jets, claiming that they have needs. Following that, other EU countries like the Netherlands stated that they would review these requests but could not yet commit to sending them. Poland, on the other hand, has stated that it is prepared to supply fighter jets to Ukraine in collaboration with NATO if the United States also shares in these perks. America will suffer fiscal challenges as well as serious concerns if they run out of ammunition, according to Biden. Zelensky expressed his gratitude for the aid that came after their remarks for assistance, as well as for every country that stood by him after all of the horrors that occurred. NATO military ministers convened in Brussels to discuss deconfliction, weapons, and any other required deconfliction of this huge war between Russia and Ukraine. Following these discussions, a Western intelligence official serving the Financial Times stated that the ammunition and relocation shortage in Ukraine was severe. He stated that it is vital that the impending aid delivery to Ukraine be conducted out fast and precisely while under Russian pressure. As an example, Ukraine was said to have answered with 20,000 artillery shots, which is 4 times more than Russia to Ukraine in exchange for 5,000 artillery shots per day. While these artillery blasts clearly show Russia's arms industry sufficiency, they also show that Ukraine's military sector is failing as a result. Ukraine's need for Western support is palpable, and Russia can exploit Ukraine's deficiency to its advantage. Invading Russia has authorized the deployment of fighter planes to undertake a fresh offensive plan on the Ukrainian border. Western intelligence professionals see the significance of Russia's initiative, a slowing ground offensive operation in Moscow. Russia's ground forces are weakened in tremendous difficulty, and they are ready to move air campaign vehicles to the front line to support this situation. Another intelligence specialist stated that if the quantity and strength of air defense systems are not greatly boosted in order for Ukraine to survive despite Russia's air operations, jets, and helicopters, the current difficulties will inevitably worsen with the simplicity of forecasting what has happened and what will happen. US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin stated that the U.S. has made and will make the required support to Ukraine and air defense systems against these events. Austin stated after the Ukrainian Defense Contact Group meeting at Ramstein Air Base that they should always be ready for a major airstrike and that they should develop and strengthen any air defense weapons they have, and then stated that we want to make sure that Ukraine has the ability to protect and support themselves in the event that Russia decides to involve its air force on the battlefield. The decisive hammer has fallen in support of Ukraine. Poland and Slovakia have put themselves at the forefront. However, the entire path of the conflict will be altered. Poland has prepared fighter jets for Ukraine. After that, the entire universe became jumbled, and he chose a completely other path. Putin's situation is deteriorating in the final days of the Russian-Ukraine war. The Ukrainian army began to consistently outnumber the Russians as a result of the advantages it obtained one after the other. As a result, the Ukrainian army now has the upper hand in every way. However, it is clear that Zelensky in particular prioritizes backing for warplanes. When Zelensky has supplied what he wants, these subsequent developments have utterly complicated everything. It was already known that Ukraine had been prepared to launch a key strike against the Russian military in recent days. Furthermore, the Russians are effectively surrounded now that Ukraine has access to the authority it seeks. These latest steps have been defined as ensuring that enough damage is done to Russia. The Ukrainian army's modernization, thanks to the assistance it got, has reached a level that frightens all Russian soldiers. However, the Ukrainian army, which had been preparing for such a large move, began to finalize its preparations. Following that, Ukrainian military have advanced to the stage where they will perform crucial actions in a variety of places. But with this new assistance, all has changed. Before we go into the specifics of the help, you can use the amazing thank you button to show your support for our crew who are working tirelessly to bring you the most accurate information in the conflict from the start of the war. a large amount of Western assistance began to come in Ukraine because of their contributions. The Ukrainian army was able to establish a significant advantage against the Russians. However, it is well known that Ukraine has a comprehensive invasion resistance strategy. The Ukrainian army has used the F-16s that it has been wanting for a long time. On the basis of this plan, the F-16s will allow Ukrainian military to systematically shoot down Russian aircraft. However, it is possible to state that Russian soldiers are now entirely isolated from further air attacks. Concerning the fighter jets, Slovakia and Poland have now taken a decisive step that will change everything. Following that, action was made to achieve the greatest triumph against the Russians. Poland and Slovakia have decided to contribute Soviet-made MiG-29 from their decommissioned fleets. As a result of this news, the Ukrainian army began to take steps to achieve a completely different place in the field of Air Force. Following these declarations, the major crucial action is expected to be taken. In the case of tanks, the Ukrainian army took a similar step. Initially, Poland was the first country to resolve to provide tanks to Ukraine. Following that, Germany agreed to provide Ukraine with Leopard 2s. Ukraine began to gain significant successes as a result of these steps, particularly in square engagements. However, the assistance offered by Poland and Slovakia shifted everything to another level. This support, which is seen as a critical threshold, will clear the way for the Ukrainian army to receive greater assistance in a variety of sectors. However, NATO includes a large number of countries. While some of these countries agree with Slovakia and Poland, others are utterly opposed to Ukraine's assistance. The subject of sending assistance to Ukraine has split the entire globe into two distinct camps. One of these blocs believes that the Ukrainian army is now receiving widespread backing, while the other feels that this effort just makes the Russians more nervous because the Russian army has already launched and defeated multiple attacks on Ukraine. It is well understood that following Poland's important step, Croatia and Hungary will continue to move in the opposite direction, even in this area. The Croatian Prime Minister's remarks will astound the entire world. Croatia claims that helping Ukraine enrages Putin even more, a potential threat. This condition, which will lead to the onset of World War II, re-emphasizes the world's difficulties in many sectors. Even a political alliance opposing Putin has not yet been fully constituted. Putin, emboldened by the fact that NATO is facing such difficulties on its own, continues to adopt more hostile and ambitious moves. Putin is well aware that he is being cornered in reaction to the important support flowing to Ukraine and the steps that will put Ukraine ahead in many areas. Because of this predicament, he began to plan a variety of actions against Ukrainian military. After that, everything became entangled with Putin's decision to take the decisive step. Putin sat down at the table to sign a significant deal with Belarus in light of the entrance of several supports to Ukraine, particularly the arrival of the Ukrainian Air Force to a new level. Belarus was of significant interest to the Russians, particularly because it was strategically important. Putin opted to place nuclear weapons in Belarus after seeing the country as a potential weapon against Europe. Here are some of the reactions to this circumstance. In these days of mutual bluffs and threats, the Ukrainian army will now take key moves in a variety of areas. The Russian army will be fully repulsed from the occupied zone as a result of this key action and will be forced to return to its boundaries. But this has truly begun to become a major challenge for Putin. This maneuver has effectively cornered Putin for some time. The Ukrainian army has been at a crossroads. It has a quality that can corner the Russians thanks to modernization inside the army and Western help. If Ukraine wins this battle, Russia will be able to demonstrate both its regional power and its problems in a variety of sectors. Because Russia is no longer the most cited country in that region, it will open the way for key moves to be made by eliciting responses from a large number of countries at once. Because even a weak country like Ukraine has annihilated the Russian army with devastating blows, it will clear the door for other satellite countries to support the Ukrainian army as well. When satellite countries rise up against Putin, the regional power balance will be radically upset. There is also one point on which a big majority of war analysts agree. This topic will demonstrate to the entire globe that everything has changed. According to military specialists, the Ukrainian army has begun to take the necessary actions in a variety of sectors. The Russian army was able to get into considerable trouble as a result of these. This, once again, demonstrated to the entire world the awful days that the Russian army has been experiencing for years because of the moves that Russia has been taking against Ukraine for some time. It is unclear what the Russian military will do now. As a result, it has been demonstrated to the entire world that the Russian army has made no progress since the Soviet Union's demise. The Ukrainian army has begun to develop the ability to take a variety of actions. One of the key reasons for this is that Putin actually killed a huge portion of the Russian army due to his own paranoia. As a result of this action against Russian soldiers, it was just a matter of time until very serious problems arose throughout the conflict. Many of the incidents mentioned as the primary reason why the Russian army, which has not taken even the slightest move against Ukraine, has found itself in these positions, are of such a kind that they would entirely complicate things. Putin, who has yet to accomplish a single political or international breakthrough, is now anticipated to be left alone with major upheavals. Following that, when Putin's power is left alone with high tensions, it is unclear how the Russian army will intervene if these problems persist. It is only a matter of time before Putin's power crumbles. Putin will face a significant risk as a result of the establishment of this mindset. Now, he will have to retire from his post at some point. Ukraine has taken a significant step forward. The Russian convoys looked for gaps to escape. Ukraine has effectively cornered the Russians with their next move. The Russian army, which was running low on ammunition, was at a loss for what to do. Putin has gone insane with rage with this latest move. The Ukrainian army was able to organize the most significant operation of the conflict. As a result of this, the Ukrainian army began to adopt diverse actions in the final days of the Russian-Ukrainian war. Because the Russians are still fighting in many regions, the Ukrainian army has begun to adjust the nature of all its operations. The use of Ukrainian soldiers' advantages was at the heart of this development. The Ukrainian army has decided to shoot Russians in their blood rather than in fierce confrontations, and he delivered the most powerful blow to the ammunition caravan for a long time. The Ukrainian army has taken flag officers very seriously. However, as a result of the hidden weapon that Ukraine has unveiled, it has begun to consistently catch the Russians off guard. If this trend continues, the Ukrainian army will no longer allow Russians to breathe in this territory. Putin, aware of this, began deploying many convoys towards the Ukrainian territory. As a result of Ukraine blowing up convoys one after the other, the Russians began to face a severe lack of ammunition and supplies. Following it, the Ukrainian army knew that if the Ukrainian soldiers could bring the Russians to a halt, the Ukrainian army would gain an advantage. When the Ukrainian army learned that the Russians were planning one last convoy reinforcement, it reacted promptly, and the flag officers began to scan the skies for the Russian convoy. Don't forget to support us so that we can bring you the most accurate and up-to-date information before the details of the surgery. As ammo convoys of Russian soldiers approach in this region, the Ukrainian army has begun preparations. When the Ukrainian observation and reconnaissance soldiers took their positions, the actual coordinate information began to be determined when Ukrainian reconnaissance troops saw Russian soldiers and an ammo truck approaching from a distance. They swiftly transmitted news to the central region. The Bayraktars took off from the neighboring airport as a result of correctly providing the coordinates. And the Ukrainian army is preparing to be dealt the most severe blow since the beginning of the war. This is what enabled Putin to confront the most serious crisis in the Ukrainian region because the Ukrainian army understands the magnitude of the Russian problem. It is well understood that these munitions are also crucial in the conflict. But recognizing this, the Ukrainian army launched one of its short-term attacks, effectively cornering the Russians. The Russian army convoy was not even protected by an air defense system. The Ukrainian army, having received this intelligence from its sources within Russia, promptly directed the flag officers to this area. The Russian army suffered the worst damage it has ever experienced as a result of back-to-back bombardments. The Ukrainian army has now cut off the Russian army's whole ammunition network. However, numerous organizations inside the army and Russian soldiers began to revolt, and the Ukrainian army authorized Russian army groups to undertake indirect operations against Putin. This operation served as the foundation for many of Ukraine's recent gains. Things were changing drastically in the Ukrainian territory, where Russian soldiers were facing significant difficulties. It was unclear how things would play out as a result of Russian soldiers being placed in a tough situation as a result of Russia's PO policy. Putin has lost around 200,000 men, as well as a considerable number of tanks and fighter jets since the start of the war. In addition to causing significant harm to the army, these incidents lowered the morale of many soldiers. With this demoralization, Russian forces, unable to make even a minor breakthrough against Ukraine, began to feel literally surrounded during this moment when the Ukrainian army gained a significant edge. Western support also shifted dramatically. While every Western help allowed the Ukrainian army to modernize, the most significant action came from Putin himself. Inadvertently, the Russian army assisted Ukraine to modernize. Putin is being recognized for the problems he has faced in foreign policy in recent days because of these issues. Many countries have taken steps to obstruct him rather than helping the Russian army. As a result, the Ukrainian army has advanced to the point where it can make different breakthroughs on each subject. Russia was squeezed on all fronts because so many countries believed Putin ought to be stopped. With this, the way for Ukrainian forces to make a variety of maneuvers has begun to open up. And with the most recent assistance, Ukraine has taken action to inflict one of the most critical blows to the Russian army. In recent days, it has been clear that Russia will confront even greater challenges because of their advances in several locations. The Ukrainian army has begun to easily assure that the Russians are trapped. This, once again, underlined the Ukrainian army's dominance in several places. However, Putin's drive to modernize Ukraine was of such magnitude that it would affect everything. And with this maneuver, the Ukrainian army was able to seize the Russian army's most powerful weapons. Putin has begun to make numerous gains in that area. Putin, who set up a 2-week occupation schedule at the start of the war with the goal of making the occupation in this region as brief as possible, even took note of the regions to be occupied. Despite this, the fact that he was at a stage where he could confront the Ukrainian army had far-reaching consequences around the world. The Ukrainian army was able to repel the Russian army from behind, thanks to the defense lines it had created and its successful ambushes. Following that, Russian soldiers abandoned a huge quantity of weapons and vehicles in the vicinity. As a result, the Russian army's breakthroughs in all sectors have begun to shift because Russian soldiers have begun to be sent towards Ukrainian forces in an unskilled and unarmed manner. This was the final point that exhausted the Russian army's tolerance. Russian troops were planning an attack on Ukraine. The Ukrainian army, aware of this, responded with devastating defeats. As a result, the Russian forces sustained significant losses. However, the trucks and weapons left behind are now in the possession of Ukrainian military. Furthermore, despite attempting to close the army's troop shortfall, Putin announced mobilization. So he wanted to enlist a big number of people who had never held a gun in the army. Putin, who appointed a huge number of commanders to handle these people's training programs, was confronted with a major challenge in the Russian army. There were also rigid hierarchical norms. Furthermore, there was no adequate weapon that could be handed to Russian forces. As a result, Putin launched a big number of weapons going back to the Soviet Union era, and he made a move against the Ukrainian army that allowed him to lose the lives of his own troops. Putin provided these men with rusted weaponry and tanks from the 1950s. As a result, the Russian army was compelled to continue living in a scenario in which it could not launch a successful offensive. Despite this, the world press was shocked to learn that the Russians were preparing to make the most dramatic move yet. It was virtually suicide to send the Russians against the Ukrainian soldiers who had been in the lead for some time because morale was so strong. A modernized Ukrainian army could have won back-to-back wins against the Russian army. Putin, who was unaware of this, began to act at a point when he had no idea what to do. However, the views of war analysts on this matter stunned the entire world. According to military specialists, the Ukrainian army has reached a tipping point where it will achieve significant advances. As a result, it is just a matter of time before Ukrainian soldiers gain awareness in a variety of sectors. The Russian army, on the other hand, is well aware that it is approaching a different era. It is also known that if the invasion is postponed, Russian troops will continue to fight it. If this trend continues, the Ukrainian army may be able to force Putin out of office. Everything in Russia is catching fire. The fires continue to burn. The massive fire that erupted in Moscow also sparked a massive fear in the Kremlin. Russian President Vladimir Putin has ordered all Moscow fire departments to report for duty. Despite extensive efforts, the fires could not be brought under control. Putin has dispatched fire departments from neighboring cities to flee the raging inferno. The Russian-Ukrainian conflict has been raging for more than a year. The Bakhmut and Luhansk regions, known as the hardest battlegrounds, also saw extremely early developments. On the one side, the Russian invaders are attempting to cross the defense line erected by Ukrainian forces in the Bakhmut region, while on the other they are launching a simultaneous offensive on the Luhansk region. Russian forces unable to breach the Ukrainian defense line in the Bakhmut region with ground soldiers have resorted to airstrikes. Airstrikes in the Bakhmut region have also intensified dramatically. Russian military Su-25 fighter jets recently began action to breach the Ukrainian defense line in the Bakhmut region. Su-25 planes attempting to offer aviation support to the Russian military's ground fight were shot down as they entered Bakhmut airspace. The Ukrainian army used anti-aircraft rocket systems taken to the front to successfully shoot down the Russian invaders as Su-25 fighter jets. The planes, which began to burn after being damaged by Ukrainian soldiers following successful shots, attempted to glide through the air for a while. But those that did not make a safe landing crashed near the Bakhmut border. At the same time, Russian forces, which have also initiated heated fights in the Luhansk region, seek to fully stop the clashes planned by courageous Ukrainian soldiers in the Luhansk region. Many occupied Russian troops have begun to be deployed to the region on the orders of Russian General Staff Chief Valery Gerasimov in order to halt the advance of Ukrainian forces in the Luhansk region. Lyman's mobilized Ukrainian forces, along with a big battalion, are continuing to push fast and successfully into the Lysychansk region of Luhansk. For a period, the Russian invaders clashed with the Ukrainian army in the region. But the Russian forces, unable to withstand the power of the Ukrainian soldiers any longer, were forced to flee the city. Ukrainian soldiers were successful in retaking the city after being repulsed in the Lysychansk district. The Russian invaders stopped in the Luhansk region and began to regroup in preparation for a new onslaught. The Russian army, which was planning to mobilize and go to war, ran into something it had not anticipated, fearing that Ukrainian forces might reclaim the Luhansk region. Russian General Gerasimov issued an immediate order to send Russian troops to this region. The Lysychansk region, which was long occupied by the Russian army during the war, has recently been taken over by Ukrainian forces with the latest operation. This region, which had been under Russian control, was returned to Ukrainian government. The Ukrainian army has lost its ability to stand up to the Russian army. Taking advantage of the aid gained, the Ukrainian army began to retake the Russian occupied cities with overwhelming force. Together with this force, Ukrainian forces began to plan operations not only on their own land, but also on territories within Russia's borders, in order to demonstrate their power to the Russian army. While the battle in Ukraine continues apace, an incident in Russia has had a significant impact on the global agenda. The Kremlin was in complete disarray as a result of a massive explosion in Moscow. Following this hysteria, Kremlin authorities issued a red alert on Putin's direction. Senior Kremlin officials convened a massive gathering at the palace. We will provide details about the fire news. We will provide details about the fire news. Fires triggered by massive explosions have recently increased dramatically in Russia. The Russian people are extremely concerned as a result of these incidents. The public that is concerned about the safety of life wants a solution to these incidents. An explosion and fires at a big natural gas production facility owned by Gazprom in Moscow have officially brought Russia to its knees. This explosion at the natural gas producing facility is suspected to be a sabotage attempt. Many Ukrainian separatists within Russia have triggered several explosions and fires, as well as sabotage actions within the boundaries. These sabotage attempts are thought to have been carried out with plastic explosives. The fires that erupted in the aftermath of the explosion reached a height of meters in order to quell this late-night fire. The Russian authorities mobilized all of Moscow's fire departments and attempted to contain it. Russians who were close to the explosion and fires recorded and uploaded videos of the tragedy on the IR social media profiles. The fire also elicited a tremendous response across all social media platforms. Although Gazprom officials claim that the sabotage was carried out by pro-Ukrainian activists, the Russian government issued a statement claiming that the explosion was an accident. The Russian administration appears unwilling to acknowledge that the explosions and fires inside the country's borders were orchestrated by Ukrainian separatists following the Russian authorities' statement about the explosion. Gazprom officials stated that they had made a mistake by claiming that the explosion was caused by a leak in the natural gas pipeline rather than sabotage. These explosions and fires that have occurred within Russia have recently begun to frighten Russian civilians. Following these explosions, Russian residents appeared to have lost trust in Putin due to his incapacity to protect even the safety of life. Putin, on the other hand, issued a statement following the public outpouring, claiming that the explosions were the consequence of an accident that the corporations failed to notice. Following that, in recent months, a massive explosion in the port of St. Petersburg also severely damaged a Russian Army Navy ship. However, Russian officials claim that the explosion was likewise an accident, as can be seen. Russian President Vladimir Putin appears to have had no idea that the war would be felt within Russia's borders as well. The Russian invaders, who have carried out many attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure installations since the beginning of the war, have had no reservations about committing war crimes. However, these attacks have recently begun to occur within Russia's borders as these explosions and fires in Russia, according to war analysts, are carried out by Ukrainians and minority individuals living in Russia. As is well known, there is a sizable minority of pro-Ukrainian citizens living in Russia's independent republics. Many resistance organizations have been founded within Russia's borders, particularly in Dagestan and Crimea. Together with the sabotage attempts of these resistance organizations, the Russian army is significantly reducing its power in the regions where it operates. A covert Ukrainian resistance movement known as AIDS has arrested many Russian commanders in Crimea and released photographs of the massive operation on social media networks. He stated that the purpose of the entirely hidden direct organization known as AIDS is to liberate Crimea from Russian occupation and reconnect it to the Aquino administration. Russian President Vladimir Putin is now pursuing his annexation of Ukrainian territory while also dealing with protests and riots within Russia. Putin appears to have been incorrect when he stated that this war would last little more than a week without declaring the Ukrainian war. Putin began to have serious regrets after underestimating the power of the Ukrainian army, and even after a year of a week-long battle, Putin continues to lie. Putin continues to lie. Putin, who is attempting to fool the entire public, is no longer capable of doing so. The public is aware of the events that have occurred and wishes for them to halt.